One introduction RAWSEP view the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove, and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, or RAWSEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM 2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM 2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this RAWSEP podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM 2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025, and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning wood. The adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives, and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM 2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Webisode 57DHXXL September 18, 2025 Key Moments from the Testimony of an Ousted CDC Director. In Webisode 57DHXXL 1 RFK Junior Vaccine Denial Key Moments from the Testimony of an Ousted CDC Director ACIP Panel meets Thursday. This week, 2 Jimmy Kimmel taken off air at Personal Behest of Trump 3 led by Donkey's attacks Orwellian arrests after Trump Epstein Windsor Castle projections 4 United States Congress possible government shut down 5 Republican leader. John Thune effectively changed the Senate rules to allow blocs of nominees to be confirmed by a simple majority vote called the nuclear option rather than a 60-vote supermajority main content. Headlines: The Guardian September 18, 2025 RFK Junior Vaccine Denial, the RFK Junior anti-vaccine fight, and U.S. fear for public health. Key moments from testimony of the ousted director of the CDC. Susan Monarez spoke alongside ex-chief medical officer Debra Houry about vaccines. RFK Jr. and threats to U.S. health. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity. And relationship with residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 organization. The Guardian. September 17, 2025 2 former Centers for Disease Control CDC leaders testified at a fiery congressional hearing on Wednesday, taking aim at the RFK Jr. sweeping changes to the agency and the public health system of America. Susan Monarez, the CDC director, who was fired after less than a month, and Debra Houry, the chief medical officer who resigned after a decade at the agency, faced lawmakers on the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Help Committee. The hearing, chaired by Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, saw senators from both sides of the aisle question the impact of the RFK Jr. dismantling of vaccine standards. Here are the main takeaways. 1. Monarez said she was fired for not complying with the RFK Jr. vaccine agenda. Monarez said RFK Jr. demanded blanket approval of each and every one of the recommendations in the upcoming vaccine advisory panel meeting. Monarez claimed RFK Jr. said if she could not do that, she would need to resign. I did not resign, and that is when he told me he had already spoken to the White House about having me removed, Monarez said. When Bernie Sanders asked Monarez why she refused to rubber stamp vaccine recommendations without seeing them or the evidence behind them, she explained it was not negotiable. I refused to do it because I have built a career on scientific integrity, and my worst fear was that I would then be in a position of approving something that would reduce access of life-saving vaccines to children and others who need them, she said. 2. Monarez and Houry raised flags about the impact of the RFK Jr. vaccine agenda. An advisory committee on Immunization Practices ACIP meeting on Thursday loomed over the hearing. RFK Jr. has replaced many members of the panel with other people who question the science of government-recommended vaccines. I know that the medical community has raised concerns about whether or not, again, they have the commensurate backgrounds to be able to understand the data and the evidence, and to evaluate it appropriately, Monarez said. Monarez also said there was a risk of vaccines being restricted without rigorous review. She continued, the stakes are not theoretical. We already have seen the largest measles outbreak in more than 30 years, which claimed the lives of 2 children. If vaccine protections are weakened, preventable diseases will return. Meanwhile, Houry said she had significant concerns about the ACIP meeting, as the public had not been able to weigh in. The pair said the prospect of future pandemics is what keeps them up at night. Answering a question by Democratic Senator John Hickenlooper, Monarez and Houry expressed concern over how the U.S. might respond to future pandemics. I do not believe that we will be prepared, Monarez said. Houry echoed similar sentiments, saying, I am concerned about the future of the CDC and public health in our country. 3. Monarez said RFK Jr. had expressed disdain for CDC employees. He called in that context the CDC the most corrupt federal agency in the world. Monarez said he said that CDC employees were killing children, and they do not care. He said CDC employees were bought by the pharmaceutical industry. He said the CDC forced people to wear masks and social distance like a dictatorship. Monarez said the health secretary did not express condolences for David Rose, the police officer who was killed during the recent shooting at the CDC headquarters in Atlanta. The perpetrator had blamed the COVID vaccine for making him depressed and suicidal. 4. Monarez and Houry said politics is driving changes to vaccine recommendations. When asked about the public implications of health decisions made by political staff, Monarez expressed concern. She added, these are important and highly technical discussions that have life-saving implications. Similarly, Houry accused RFK Jr. of politicizing the CDC, saying that the secretary censored CDC science, politicized its processes, and stripped leaders of independence. In response to a question about career scientists who have been excluded from the office of the director, Houry said that nearly everyone who left is political. A level down, we do have center directors, although 80% are now acting because they have been fired, resigned, or retired, Houry said. 5. Monarez said that RFK Jr. deemed her untrustworthy for expressing her concerns. Monarez laid out a timeline of events that resulted in her firing. In a meeting with RFK Jr., Monarez claimed he was very concerned that she had spoken to members of the Help Committee about what was being asked of her with regard to approving vaccine recommendations and firing career officials. He told me I was never to do it again, Monarez said. When Republican Senator Ashley Moody questioned whether the Monarez decision to contact the committee chair was calculated, Senator Cassidy pushed back. It is entirely appropriate for someone with oversight concerns to contact my office or me or frankly any of us, he said. Upon receiving outreach from Dr. Monarez, I contacted both the Secretary and the White House to inquire what was happening and to express concerns about what was alleged to a Jimmy Kimmel taken off air at Personal Behest of Trump explainer. What did Jimmy Kimmel say about the Kirk killing Trump administration? The Guardian. Jimmy Kimmel Republicans working very hard to capitalize on the Kirk killing late night TV roundup. The Guardian. Trump celebrates Jimmy Kimmel suspension as some networks replace a show with a Kirk tribute. U.S. politics live. Trump United Kingdom visits Starmer Banks on £150 billion investment to placate critics of Trump state visit. The Guardian. Headlines: The Guardian September 17, 2025 Science. The Trump war on science leaves U.S. public health experts reeling. There will be lasting damage. The Guardian. Trump economy. Federal Reserve cuts U.S. interest rates for first time since December. Federal Reserve. The Guardian labor statistics chief fired by Trump sounds alarm over dangerous interference by the White House U.S. economy. The Guardian. Trump Kirk and lack of gun control. Obama says Trump deepened U.S. divide in rush to identify enemy after Kirk shooting Barack Obama. The Guardian. Republicans propose $88 million in security for lawmakers after Kirk killing Republicans. The Guardian. Trump United Kingdom visit. Trump joins royals for state banquet at Windsor as thousands protest against the Trump visit. UK politics live. 3 led by donkeys attacks. Orwellian arrests after Trump Epstein Windsor Castle projections. UK news. The Guardian. RAWSEP view led by donkeys is a British political campaign group established in December 2018 as an against Brexit group, but which has also criticized other actions of the Conservative government since the creation of the group. Its 4 founders have used satire targeted at pro-Brexit politicians. The main campaign of Led by Donkeys consists of quotes presented as tweets. These tweets state the previous political positions of politicians, which according to the group, have not stood the test of time. The campaign was initially run as a guerrilla operation in which Led by Donkeys posters were plastered over existing adverts. It was then expanded into a crowdfunded campaign that purchased advertising space on hundreds of billboards across the UK. Later, the group staged real-life stunts, including projecting messages on iconic places, including the Houses of Parliament and the White Cliffs of Dover, carving giant messages on beaches and fields, and directing crowds to unfurl huge flags at pro-European Union marches. Videos of these messages were subsequently viewed millions of times on social media. The campaign group won the award for Best Social Media Campaign in the 2019 Social Purpose Awards, and won gold in the National Social Impact category in the 2020 Outdoor Media Awards. The name of the group comes from the phrase lions led by donkeys, referring to British soldiers in the First World War who were led to their deaths by leaders deemed incompetent and indifferent. Headlines. Other media. September 17, 2025. 2. Jimmy Kimmel taken off air at personal behest of Trump. ABC polls. Jimmy Kimmel live indefinitely for saying Kirk assassin was part of MAGA gang. ABC led by Disney polls. Jimmy Kimmel live. After FCC chair criticizes the Kirk comments. Jimmy Kimmel taken off air at personal behest of Trump. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship with residents against would smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 organization. Heather Cox Richardson. September 17, 2025. ABC was pulling the television show of comedian Jimmy Kimmel off the air. The suspension is allegedly over his comments Monday about the murder of right-wing activist Kirk, although Chris Hayes of All In pointed out that after CBS pulled Stephen Colbert, another political comedian, off the air in July, Trump told reporters that comedians Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel would be next. They are going to be going. I hear they are going to be going. Kimmel has one of the top late-night television shows, attracting younger viewers in the 18 to 49-year-old demographic. He delivers monologues that skewer Trump. His YouTube channel, which replays his show, has more than 20 million subscribers. During his monologue on the Monday, September 15, 2025 show, Kimmel said, "We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half-staff, which got some criticism, but on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this." Kimmel then played a clip of the Trump response to a reporter who asked how the president was holding up after the Kirk death. Trump answered, "I think very good. And by the way, right there you see all the trucks. They just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for 150 years. And it is going to be a beauty." On the podcast of right-wing influencer Benny Johnson on Wednesday, chair of the Federal Communications Commission FCC Brendan Carr said that the Kimmel words were part of a concerted effort to try to lie to the American people and that the FCC was going to have remedies that we can look at. Carr explained there is actions we can take on licensed broadcasters. It is past time that a lot of these licensed broadcasters themselves push back on Comcast and Disney and say we are not going to run Kimmel anymore because we licensed broadcasters are running the possibility of fines or license revocation from the FCC, the largest operator of ABC affiliates Nexstar, which needs FCC approval for a $6.2 billion merger, said it would stop airing the Kimmel show from its stations. Then ABC suspended the Kimmel show. Benny Johnson, the podcaster on whose show Carr threatened Kimmel, was one of the influencers Russian state media funded to spread propaganda before the 2024 election. After the Kimmel suspension, Johnson posted on social media, "We did it for you, Kirk, and we are just getting started." Media. South Park delays season 27 episode 5 hours before airtime for United States Congress possible government shutdown. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship with residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 organization. Axios. September 17, 2025. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is summoning his full caucus for a strategy meeting tomorrow on the government shutdown fight. Democrats are lurching closer to the once unthinkable for them choice to trigger a government shutdown. House and Senate Dems released their joint funding proposal tonight, which serves as a counteroffer to the GOP short-term stopgap. The Democratic proposal leans heavily on healthcare and would restrict President Trump's ability to withhold spending appropriated by Congress. At a caucus meeting this week, Schumer pointed to a recent poll of key battleground states that showed voters would overwhelmingly blame Republicans for not working with Democrats if the government shuts down. Republican Speaker Mike Johnson wants to vote Friday on the House 7-week bill, which includes funding for lawmaker security. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries needs every Democrat to vote no, which they can do without triggering a shutdown. Thune must keep the 52 of his 53 senators on board. Boxing in the Democrats who would love to vote no without a shutdown. Schumer appears to be holding the line with only a half dozen Democrats contemplating joining the Republicans. That makes a shutdown more likely. Some Democrats are privately concerned, as they were in March, that the Trump administration does not mind a government shutdown once funding stops. Russ Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, has some discretion in deciding which parts of the government are essential and therefore will remain open. Headlines. The New York Times. September 18, 2025. Democrats as shutdown looms. Democrats Outline demands on Medicaid and Obamacare. The New York Times Georgia election official Republican Brad Raffensperger, who defied Trump, enters the race for governor. The New York Times Jimmy Kimmel taken off air at personal behest of Trump. Explainer reactions to the ABC polling of Kimmel reflect an American partisan divide. The New York Times Trump administration announces new civics effort with MAGA-aligned groups. The New York Times media meta unveils smart glasses with apps and an artificial intelligence assistant. The New York Times RFK Junior ACIP panel meets Thursday. This week, questions are raised about reliability of the ACIP vaccine panel as policy review gets underway. The New York Times Trump economy top best and A. Daniel Katz expected to be tapped as number 2 at International Money Fund IMF. The New York Times Trump United Kingdom visit behind castle walls. The rich and powerful celebrate Trump. The New York Times United States Congress 5 Republican Leader John Thune effectively changed the Senate rules to allow blocks of nominees to be confirmed by a simple majority vote called the nuclear option rather than a 60-vote supermajority, a pending precedent. Thune bows to realities of a polarized Senate. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship with residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 organization. The New York Times, September 17, 2025. On Wednesday, Republicans led by Thune completed a rare maneuver that effectively changed the Senate rules to allow blocks of nominees to be confirmed by a simple majority vote rather than a 60-vote supermajority, a move they muscled through along party lines. Thune called it a necessary corrective to end a Democratic blockade that was stalling confirmation of President Trump appointees. Over 100 more nominees will be ready for confirmation by the end of this week to get that process moving. Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming, the number 2 Republican, said on Wednesday, "It is time for the Senate to clear the nominations backlog and clear it quickly." Headlines: The New York Times, September 17, 2025. Consumers Coffee Shop, a tariff headache for New York coffee shops. The New York Times Consumers Games, a group of socialists created a hit game that tore them apart. The New York Times Consumers Exercise Build Your Own Hit Workout. The New York Times Consumers reading this little reading light helped me ditch my phone and get back to real books. Reviews by Wirecutter. Consumers Food Recipes, all-purpose biscuits recipe with video. Consumers Exercise, the 5 best full-body exercises according to trainers. The New York Times Consumers Hormone Therapy, testosterone therapy for menopause, what the hormone can and cannot do. The New York Times Consumers Supplements, do you need to take magnesium supplements? The New York Times Consumers Preventive Medicine, how do super eggers stay young? What 25 years of research has revealed? The New York Times Consumers Food RFK Junior report will not solve food issues in America. Experts say the New York Times Consumers Exercise skipping is not just for kids, it can be a great workout. The New York Times Democrats Opinion, how we the people lost control of our lives and how we can get it back. The New York Times Democrats, a new Democratic think tank, wants to curb the influence of liberal groups. The New York Times Democrats, 100 liberal philanthropies prepare to push back against Trump crackdown. The New York Times Human Interest, this frustrated New York pedestrian calls out bad walkers. The New York Times Jimmy Kimmel taken off air at personal behest of Trump. ABC pulls Jimmy Kimmel off air for Kirk comments. The New York Times movie star Democrat Robert Redford, 15 memorable movies to stream. The New York Times Musk Tesla remains of a missing teen found in Tesla registered to the singer D4VD. The New York Times New York City mayoral race, Carl Heastie, another Democratic holdout, is expected to endorse Mamdani. The New York Times New York City Times Square casino proposal is voted down after mounting opposition. The New York Times Pennsylvania Democrats, why a Pennsylvania court election this November could matter in 2028. The New York Times pre-Trump military John H. Luckadoo, last pilot from a story bomber group, dies at 103. The New York Times RFK Junior Vaccine denial, senator and insurers cast out on U.S. vaccine panel as it readies review. The New York Times Trump administration live updates, ex-officials at CDC tell senators how RFK Jr. is risking public health. The New York Times former CDC head says RFK Jr. is risking public health. The New York Times senator suggests meeting between RFK Jr. and his CDC director was recorded, then backtracks. The New York Times Western states issue their own vaccine recommendations to counter RFK Jr. The New York Times science top scientists find growing evidence that greenhouse gases are in fact a danger. The New York Times Trump actions national parks to remove some materials on slavery and tribes. The New York Times labor statistics chief fired by Trump sounds alarm over dangerous White House interference U.S. economy. The Guardian Trump attorney Giuliani must pay $1.3 million to former lawyers. Judge rules. The New York Times Trump economy, Howard Lutnick, the Pierre Hotel, and claims of a secret plan. The New York Times Trump Federal Bureau of Investigation FBI burns methamphetamine near animal shelter sickening workers and pets. The New York Times Trump and Federal Reserve Fed lowered rates for first time this year. The New York Times Fed cuts rates for first time this year. The New York Times Federal Reserve cuts U.S. interest rates for first time since December. Federal Reserve. The Guardian Trump Kirk and lack of gun control. Russia, China, and Iran used the Kirk murder to stoke conspiracy theories and division. The New York Times after national tragedies. Obama and Trump are a study in contrast. The New York Times as partisans battle over history. Former presidents try another tack. The New York Times nonpartisan groups change course after their initial words helped Trump. The New York Times here is who attended the state dinner at Windsor Castle. The New York Times UK offers Trump a royal welcome of maximum pomp and minimum politics. The New York Times the 25 essential dishes to eat in London. The New York Times gilded carriages and bearskin hats. UK royals welcome Trump. The New York Times United States Congress Democrats opinion. Questions and answers. A shutdown is simply a counterproductive response to Trump. The New York Times Washington, D.C. Barron Trump is said to move to NYU campus in Washington. The New York Times Denmark to buy long-range weapons and paradigm shift. The New York Times France crime thieves steals $700,000 in gold from Natural History Museum in Paris. The New York Times Ukraine what a no-fly zone over Ukraine would mean for the West. The New York Times Russia indoctrinates children from occupied Ukraine at 210 site study, says the New York Times surprising guests at Belarus Russia War Games. 2 American observers. The New York Times Russia jailed dissident Navalny vomited and convulsed in prison before dying. His wife says the New York Times Niger attack 22 killed as gunmen on motorbikes fire at baptism ceremony in Talabari, India. The Trump birthday call to Modi raises hopes in India for a trade deal. The New York Times Nepal young protesters in Nepal recover looted goods for shopkeepers. The New York Times opinion. Nepal Kirk and the war against the internet. The New York Times. China, how China is losing its title as the sneaker factory of the world. The New York Times.